Okay, everyone. So, you most likely just finished watching the previous video where we kind of went through the homework problems. I want to stay on this topic, and I know it can be a challenge, so I'm going to do what we sometimes do in class and just do sort of the guided notes or the required notes. So you will not have a homework assignment per se. I'm just going to ask you to take notes as I do this and then turn those notes in for your credit for the day. So you're going to have to either have a sheet of paper and a pencil going while I do this so you can play the video and work stuff out on paper, or maybe you can play the video on your phone and then have this on your iPad and write with your finger or with a stylus or whatever method works for you. But we're going to work through some problems here just to practice this method, but I know it's really tough and it's not fair to say, well, I taught it once, now you do it, because this is just not that kind of thing. I was maybe a little overambitious when I put together 4 problems, because these bottom ones, to be honest, they're awful. They're just so many steps. So we'll probably just do 3. It's good to practice these 2 equation ones, and so that's where we're going to start. And hopefully you sort of pick up and get the hang of it. Then when we get to the 3 equation ones, they don't seem quite as bad as I'm saying. So number 1, here's the augmented matrix. And remember, our ultimate goal is to get a 1, 0, 0, 1. And then whatever happens on this other side of the equal sign, that's our answer. So let's focus on the 0 here. As a general strategy, you get the zeros below the diagonal first. So how can I get a 0 there? And my thought is, if I do the top row times -2 and the bottom row times 3, that's going to give me a -6 and a +6. And then when you add those, you get 0. So this is going to be -6, +10, +46. This is going to be 6, 6, and 18. And I'm just double checking to make sure. Yeah, so you miss one sign, you do one thing wrong, and then it's a nightmare after that. So I'm going to add row 1 plus row 2. So I'm pausing to look for little mistakes wherever they may pop up, like that. Okay, so row 1 plus row 2. If I add -6 plus 6, I'm going to get 0. 10 plus 6 is going to give me 16. 46 plus 18. Always good to have a calculator handy for stuff like this, but this works out to be 64. Now, the top row here is blank. What do I put there? I could either put the previous top row or the original top row, and it's totally your choice. Generally, though, you want to go with the one with smaller numbers. So that's what I've done. So we've got our 0 here. Now let's focus on getting a 1 there. And here's how I want you to look at this. 0, 16, 64. The 0 is irrelevant. The 16 is in what you might call the Y column, or the space where the Y's were. So you can look at this as being 16Y equals 64. Remember, the dotted line is like the equal sign. Well, if you're doing a basic equation, you would divide both sides by 16 and get your answer. We're following this form of working with matrices, so instead of dividing by 16, we're going to multiply by 1/16. 1/16 times 0 is 0. 1/16 times 16 is 1. 1/16 times 64 is 4. Do 64 divided by 16 on a calculator if you need to. And then I'm just going to bring down this top row. Now, if I get to going too fast, you can't tell me to slow down, but you can pause the video. So you definitely use the pause button as much as you need to. So where are we? Well, we're kind of like half done. We've got the bottom row the way we want it, so we're not going to mess with that. Now we need to work upwards. The next best step is to focus on getting your 0 on top. How can we make that happen? Well, if I multiply this 1 times 5 and add it upwards, I'm going to have 5 plus -5, which is 0. So I guess the step I want to do is I'm going to multiply first this row times 5. So 0, 5, and 20. And then this is 3, -5, and -23. Now that you see a 5 here and a -5 there, how can you get a 0? You can add row 2 upwards to row 1. 0 plus 3 is 3. 5 plus negative 5 is 0. 20 plus negative 23 is negative 3. Of course, I have a blank line here. I could carry this down if I want to, but that would be foolish because this row was done, and I don't want to mess with the results we already got, so I'm going to bring that down. So now we've got this 0. Oops. That 0. All we need now is a 1 right here. And again, what you're looking at, this is equivalent to basically 3x, 0y equals negative 3. And if you had this equation, you would divide both sides by 3 to solve that. So in matrix math, we're going to multiply this by 1/3. 1/3 times 3 is 1. 1/3 times 0 is 0. I'm kind of just doing the distributive property. 1/3 times negative 3 is negative 1. Copy this down, and I believe I'm done. Negative 1, 4 should be the answer. Let me scroll down and check number 1. Negative 1, 4. The next one, I'm just going to peek ahead. You can see I was already kind of checking. The next one should be 5 and negative 5. Let's see if we can make that happen. Number 2. So my augmented matrix looks like this. And like in the last problem, oh, here, let me write this down. We want a 1, 0, 0, 1. That's our ultimate goal. And then whatever happens here, fine. So I'm going to start by trying to get a 0 there. To make that happen, I'm first going to multiply the top row by negative 5. So that would be negative 5, negative 15, and positive 50. And this one does not need to be multiplied by anything because negative 5 plus 5 is going to be 0, which is what I want. So in my next step, I need to do row 1 plus row 2. I'm going to sort of add it downward. Negative 5 plus 5 is 0. Negative 15 plus 3 is negative 12. 50 plus 10 is 60. My row 1 right now is blank. Like I said before, you can fill in any row 1 you want, but it makes sense to choose the one with the smaller numbers. So I'm going to choose the first row 1. Okay, so we've got 0 here. Let's look at getting a 1 right there. What could you multiply that row by to turn a negative 12 into a 1? Well, you either set it or you don't know. So if you set it and you said negative 1/12, you were right. If you did not know and you have no idea where I just got negative 1/12, kind of what I did was I looked at this as negative 12y equals 60. I started translating this. And so to solve that, I would have to divide by negative 12. Dividing by negative 12 is the same as multiplying by negative 1/12. So that's kind of where you come up with that idea from. So negative 1/12 times 0 is still 0. Negative 1/12 times negative 12 is positive 1. Negative 1/12 times 60. Again, if you have a calculator handy, that's great, but that works out to be negative 5. Now let's look at seeing how we can get a 0 there. Well, if I could multiply this 1 by a negative 3 and add it upwards, negative 3 plus 3 would give me 0. So let's do that. Let's multiply this bottom row by negative 3. Negative 3 times 0 is 0. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 5 is 15. Let me just copy this down. And so for the next step, I'm going to take row 2 and add it upwards to row 1. Adding this upwards gives me 1. Adding this upwards gives me 0. Adding that upwards gives me 5. I have a blank line right here. Can I bring this down? Yes, but that would be foolish because look at the previous one. 0, 1, negative 5. That's a completed row. So at this point, we're done. We've got our 1, 0, 0, 1. The answers that we have on the right-hand side are 5, negative 5. And we checked the answer before we started, and it is 5, negative 5. 5, negative 5. So we're good. Okay, so ideally you have this copied down. Hopefully the process of going through it is helping it sink in. You might not have 100% lock on the understanding yet, but we're moving in that direction. That's the whole goal. Number three is a real doozy. And I hope I do it right, because if I want to let you in on a little secret, this is my second time trying to do this video. The first time I made a mistake in the second step. And I'm about to make another mistake, so let me slow down. Anyway, yeah, I made a mistake in the second step. I got down to like the 6th or 7th step before I noticed it, and everything was wrong. So I just scratched the whole thing out, and then I was like, I got to start over. Okay, x, y, z. YZ, XYZ. The second equation is missing an x term. They line it up as though everything were fine, but it's not all fine. So this is going to be negative 4, negative 2, 2, dotted line, negative 2. I think that bracket should probably be a little bit bigger. The next row is 0, negative 3, 1, negative 5. And the next row, negative 1, 4, negative 3, 11. So there's our augmented matrix, realizing that there was some funny business in that second row. All right, but the good news is our goal, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, dot, 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 and then whatever those answers are. As far as that being our goal, we already have this 0 in place. So that's actually going to cut out a couple of steps. Keep in mind, I'm showing every single step. When you get really adept at doing this process, you can combine steps and do things in your head to kind of make it go a little faster. So what I'm doing in 5 or 6 steps, someone who's done it a while might do in 3 or 4 steps. Anyway, let's focus on trying to get a 0 right here. How am I going to do that? Well, I think what I can do is I can multiply this row by a negative 4. And then if I add the top row, negative 4, and this is going to turn into a positive 4, that's going to work for us. So I'm not going to change this row. I'm not going to mess with this row. I am going to make this one into 4, negative 16, 12, negative 44. 4 times negative 1, negative 4 times 4, negative 4 times negative 3, negative 4, yep. So now row 1 gets added down to row 3. Not going to change these rows. But we are going to add downwards. So negative 4 plus 4, 0. Negative 2 plus negative 16, negative 18. Negative 2 plus negative 12, I'm sorry, not negative, 2 plus 12, 14. Negative 2 plus negative 44, negative 46. And yeah, so far so good. So we've got 2 zeros here. Let's go for the next 0. Getting all the underneath the diagonal zeros first is a great way to go. Okay, so what's going to happen here? You might look at this and say if I multiply negative 2 times negative 9, that's going to give me positive 18. Positive 18 and negative 18 equals 0. The problem is you also have to multiply this by negative 9. Then you have to add it to 0, which is going to make it not a 0 anymore. But we want a 0 there. So what I'm trying to say is don't look at the first row. We are going to look at the second row. What could I do with this negative 3 to combine it with that negative 18? Well, the answer is I want to multiply the middle row by negative 6. I'm not going to mess with the top row. Middle row times negative 6, hold on. It's 0, 18. Negative 6 times 1 is negative 6. Negative 6 times negative 5 is positive 30. 0, negative 18, 14, negative 46. Now, hopefully you see the 18 and the negative 18, those will cancel each other out. So, I'm not trying to change the top row yet. I'm going to be adding the second row with the third row Where did the B come from? That's an R. So 0 plus add downward is 0. Add downward there, you get 0. Add downward here, you get 8. Add downward here, negative 16. Now the middle row. You can fill in this middle row for sure if you want. That middle row has smaller numbers, and there's no other middle row to concern myself with, so I'm going to go with the one with smaller numbers. Okay, so we've got all zeros below the diagonal. That is a major milestone when you're doing these matrix problems. Next, we want to try to get a 1 here, which should be fairly easy. You look at this as 8z equals negative 16. The obvious answer is divide both sides by 8. Oops. So we are going to multiply this row by negative, what am I doing? Negative 1/8. So don't alter the top. Don't alter the middle row. But multiply this by negative 1/8, we get 0, 0, or negative 1/8. No, just multiply by positive 1/8. That didn't make sense. 1/8 times 8 is 1, and that's what we want, a 1. 1/8 times negative 16, that's the negative I was thinking of, is negative 2. So if we try to monitor our progress, now we've got that. Now we go upward to start making zeros. Well, I think simply multiplying this by a negative 1 and adding it upwards is going to give me a 0. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm still not concerning myself with the top row. It's the third row I'm going to multiply by negative 1. That gives me 0, 0, negative 1, and 2. So now I can add this upward like that, and that'll be good. That'll give me results. So 0 plus 0, of course, is 0. 0 plus negative 3, negative 3. Negative 1 plus 1, 0. 2 plus negative 5 is negative 3. And then in this blank row, I'm not going to carry this one down. I'm going to carry that one down. 0, 0, 1, negative 2. So where are we on our progress? We've got a 0 here. Oops, didn't mean to erase that. We've got a 0 here. Let's try to get a 1 there. Well, if you look at that middle row, that's pretty equivalent to having negative 3y equals negative 3. Dividing by negative 3 would be the next step. Well, we don't divide in matrices, we multiply. So we're going to multiply that middle row by negative 1/3. The bottom row, that's kind of locked in. The top row, I'm just not concerning myself with yet. But that middle row, negative 1/3 times 0 is 0. Negative 1/3 times 3 is 1. Negative 1/3 times 0 is 0. Negative 1/3 times negative 3 is positive 1. So now we have that. Whew. There's still more to do. What could we do now? Could we possibly make this into a 0? I think we could. If I multiply that bottom row by negative 2 and then add it upwards with positive 2, it's going to give me a 0 there. Now this is the kind of step that when you've done a lot of these problems, you could sort of do it somewhat in your head kind of and shorten up the work. But I'm showing every single step, even though you probably want to just bash my face in over it. I mean, this is miserable work. You didn't hear me say that. It's not like it's on record or anything. Haha. Okay, so I multiplied the bottom row by negative 2. Now I'm going to do row 3 and add it upward to row 1. 0 plus negative 4 is still negative 4. 0 plus negative 2 is still negative 2. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. 4 plus negative 2 is 2. The middle row we aren't concerned with. The bottom row, I'm going to revert back to this row because I can and because it's already simplified. So we have this done. Now let's focus on that. How can we get rid of that -2? Are you thinking about it? Are you coming up with an idea? What if we multiply this by 2 and add it upward? I think that makes all kinds of sense. So let's multiply the middle row by 2. It's going to be 0, 2, 0, 2. Of course, the bottom row has nothing to do with it. The top row, just copy that down. Almost out of space. So I'm going to take row 2 and add it upward with row 1. 0 plus -4 is still -4. 2 plus -2 is 0. 0 plus 0 is 0. 2 plus 2 is 4. The middle row, I'm going to revert back to this form because I can and because it's already simplified. And the bottom row, I didn't touch. If we look at our progress, we've got this done. Now all we need is a 1 right there. How could I turn this -4 into a 1? If you're saying multiply that top row by -1/4, then you are getting it. -1/4 times -4 is 1. Multiply it by 0, you get 0. Multiply it by 0, you get another 0. -1/4 times 4 is -1. So basically I'm distributing this here, 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 and here. Then copy all this other work down. And we get our ordered triplet, -1, 1, -2. And that is right there. Okay, so that's a whole stinking page for that one problem. And can you see why I said we're probably not going to do this one? I mean, we could, but I don't feel like you would enjoy that because I'm feeling like you didn't enjoy this. But it gives you sort of a taste for what this is like, and that's what I want you to sort of experience. Ideally, you'll be able to do at least one of these 3 equation problems on your own. And you'll probably be able to do it in less steps because you can do some of the math in your head and save yourself some time. But that's the goal, is to get this down. Try to imagine, man, what if, look at this. Before I stop, what if you had like 2a plus 3b minus 4c plus 6d equals 5, and then a minus b plus 6c minus d equals 1. In other words, what if you had 4 variables, and then ultimately I'm going to write 4 equations, or 5 variables and 5 equations? Yeah, those exist, and you can solve them this way. I'm not saying you'd want to, but you could. All right, so put yourself through this sort of torture that you saw me do. Write it up either on notebook paper and take a picture of it, or you follow it along on a different screen and you have this on your own iPad, and then you could submit the notes as your assignment. If it's relatively complete with what I did, I will give you credit. Maybe you don't have every single little side note. I'm okay with that, but write it up, submit it. That'll be your points. And then that's it for a 3-day weekend. Please try to get this done by Monday if you can, or before the weekend starts would be better. I may have an optional survey over the weekend. That'd just be something to do if you want to. And I'll leave it at that. Okay, let me stop now. Have a great week.